Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy fun content and cool videos, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let's jump right in.
I'm typing this out on my phone, so I'm sorry if this comes out a little shaky, or if there are any errors. Asterisk after college. I moved back home to Muhlenberg, Kentucky, in the house I grew up in with my parents. They're pretty sweet people. Just your average couple of almost middle-aged people. My dad works in a factory, and my mum works as a paralegal in one of the only 3 law firms in town, so I have the house to myself most of the day. Asterisk, it was really depressing coming back home like that. I guess it's true what they say about getting a practical degree, but my dad said I would be more than welcome to stay there as long as I needed, so that gave me some breathing room. For the first month or so, I stayed in my old bedroom a lot, browsing Reddit or playing Steam games on my laptop, or just staring at the ceiling in the dark. I wish I could say I was looking for jobs wherever I could find them, but I didn't. I know I shouldn't have taken advantage of my parents like that, believe me, but there was something a little comforting about being back there again. Asterisk, when my dad told me he had a buddy named Greg that worked in security that needed a few more bodies to guard some old property, I was deflated at first. I'd be lying if I said that didn't sound like the most boring job in the world. But when he mentioned the pay, my interest peaked. It would be enough to get my own place with time. Asterisk, so I bit my cheek and gave Greg a call. We scheduled a time to meet, and even before the interview, I felt as though it was little more than a formality. Thanks, Dad. Asterisk, I punched the address that Greg gave me into my phone and took off into the cool October day. My shitty little Jetta feeling every crack in the pavement. The directions took me to an old road that most locals knew. Even I'd heard of it, though I'd never been there. It was the Crooked Road officially, but many people in town called it Breakneck. It was a route that was more like a trail than an actual road. It was mostly made up of dirt and gravel, and I felt stupid for not asking my dad if I could borrow his truck. It moved with the forest rather than cutting through it, so needless to say, I felt every single curve in that little beat-up car. I didn't see any homes or stores or anything really. Asterisk, finally. The forest opened and I saw a massive, blocky, rusty structure with hundreds of open windows, long broken with years of neglect. It looked like some kind of abandoned factory, standing 3 stories tall. I glanced down at my phone to make sure this was the place, and sure enough, it was. Jutting around the structure was a fence that was at least 10 feet high with razor wire lining its top. That seemed like a bit much. I took note that the fence looked a century newer than the building it was holding. I thought that was odd, but ultimately shrugged it off. Asterisk, I pulled up to the fence's gate, and a black guy in a security uniform waved me in, and I pulled up alongside 3 or 4 other cars parked in the gravel lot along the fence, facing away from the building. As I stepped out into daylight, I slammed the door of the Jetta twice to make sure it shut properly. I looked at the structure, and for a moment, I was entranced. I squinted my eyes and tried to peer into the busted windows, but it seemed like the darkness in there was totally immune to light. Asterisk, Cody. That snapped me out of it. Greg was walking towards me, away from a little guard booth next to the inside of the gate, with his baby-fine grey hair fluttering in the biting wind. He kept his security jacket collar flipped up, and I really wished I'd worn something warmer. I liked Greg immediately. Maybe it was because he reminded me of Dad. Asterisk, yeah. I said, asterisk, nice to meet you, son. He said, stepping up to me and putting out his hand. Asterisk, I shook it. Nice to meet you too. Asterisk, so, you ready for the tour? Asterisk, I guess so. Did you need any of my info? I started to reach for my wallet. Asterisk, he waved me off and pointed at the black guy who was walking back to the guard booth. Nah, Jeremy will get you squared away later. Besides, I think it's better if we have a nice, organic conversation. I believe that's the best way to know if you really want someone working for you. Greg flashed me his pearly whites that were less than so. Asterisk, I nodded and he put his hand on my shoulder, leading me around the perimeter of the property, following the fence. It started out pretty normal. He asked me about my parents and how they'd been getting along. We talked about my dad's heart attack from last year and my mum's cobbler. After the niceties had passed, the wind calmed and we were on the totally opposite side of the building. Asterisk, he stopped in his tracks and turned to me. Right, he said, so I'm sure you want to know a bit about the job. His voice was still relatively chipper, but something had changed in his eyes. He was all business now. Asterisk, sure. Seems pretty straightforward to me, I said. Asterisk, he chuckled. Yeah, mostly, it is. But see, I need someone to work the graveyard shift. It's not for everyone. Some people can't handle that sort of thing. Asterisk, I shrugged at this. It's a job. Asterisk, Greg clapped me on the back and shot me that grin again. That's exactly the sort of thing a prospective employer wants to hear from their only candidate. If you really think that you can handle it, the job's yours. Asterisk, we walked back around to the guard booth in complete silence. I could tell that with Greg's hefty and aged body. He was starting to get winded and red in the face. But he kept stride with me all the same. Asterisk, now I know this is going to sound weird, but on our walk back to the gate, I felt eyes on me. I kept glancing into the forest, thinking that maybe I'd see something that wasn't immediately obvious, but that wasn't it. Then it dawned on me that I was looking in the wrong direction. I was getting a creepy feeling looking into those vacant windows. Goose flesh sprung up on my bare arms, and I blamed it on the cold air. Asterisk, the guard booth was warm and cozy and could comfortably fit 2 people. The walls were made of glass from about my waist up to the roof with a completely 360-degree view. As we entered, I saw a space heater under the desk that Jeremy had propped his legs on. I filled out the paperwork. They took down my information, giving me a broad overview of my responsibilities in the job, and handed me 2 uniforms with a jacket and a hat. Asterisk, Jeremy, said Greg. Make sure Caleb knows he's coming in the night. After tomorrow, to work with the rookie. He motioned to me, asterisk, Jeremy, nodded and scribbled something into a small notebook and deposited it back into his shirt pocket. Asterisk for the next 2 days. I was surprised to find how excited I was to join the working world in proper. I had had plenty of odd jobs in college, and even tried slinging hash in a diner in high school. But somehow this seemed real. Really real. Asterisk, I didn't get a lot of sleep the day I was supposed to go in for my first night on watch. That was a mistake, but I brought a thermos full of coffee with me and rubbed my eyes into oblivion. Asterisk, when I arrived at the lot that night, another guard let me in and I parked under a cloudless, starless sky. I assumed the guard was Caleb. He went back to the booth and I followed far behind, this time ignoring the big structure as best I could. I entered the booth and Caleb sat in the chair at the desk that Jeremy had occupied earlier. He was leaning far back in his chair, slouched with his thumbs jutting out from the loops that held his belt. His hat was laying over his eyes. The new kid in town, eh? He asked in a deep and faux rugged voice. Maybe it was the sleep deprivation, or maybe it was Caleb's strange behavior, but I didn't really know what to say back to this. He spoke again. Well then, let's see how quick your hand is, cowboy. Caleb reached for his belt like lightning and pulled up a flashlight, clicking the button and blinding the ever-loving shit out of me. I saw stars and rubbed my eyes, sitting my thermos on the desk. This sent Caleb into a fit of chuckles, and he turned off the flashlight, holstering it. He reached over and lightly slapped me on the knee. I'm just fucking with you, man. He pulled his hat tight over his head, and his blonde hair plumed out from beneath it. I noticed he had a wispy thin mustache under his nose. Yeah? I tried to smile at him, but I was sure my frustration was bleeding through. Here's your belt, sir. All Greg said he wanted me to hand it off to you. It's slightly used, but the batteries in the flashlight are fresh. He slapped the belt onto the desk, and I took it up in one hand, examining it. The belt itself was thin in places, and whoever had worn it before me was definitely thicker. I laced the belt and inspected where everything was relative to my hands. Flashlight on the right side, and a small metal canister of what I could only assume was mace on my left side. I clicked the holster on my left, pulled out the tube, looking it over. Be careful with that, and be sure to not blind your damn self with it, said Caleb. It hurts more than you'd imagine. This actually did get a small, genuine smile out of me, and I placed it back into my belt. I pulled up the only other chair in the small room and sat next to Caleb. So what's it like working nights out here? Mostly, it's just boring. He paused. I guess it does get a little spooky sometimes. He wiggled his fingers, letting out a sound imitating a cartoon ghost. But it shouldn't be too hard on you tonight and tomorrow. I'll be with you till then, rookie. Caleb was mostly right. That night wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, my exhaustion notwithstanding. We chatted and played cards and patrolled the perimeter every 2 hours. I learned that Caleb was actually quite a bit older than I'd originally thought. He'd worked for a couple of prisons, apparently, but was booted due to the fact that he enjoyed recreational things. One slip on a piss test, and he was out of that game for good. He worked fast food for a year before applying to work with Greg, apparently. He'd worked the graveyard shift for the past 3 months out here on this property, and I was due to replace him. That first night was totally uneventful besides the lulling moments, where we would grow quiet, having nothing to say, and staring out into the expansive darkness all around us. It really did feel like any moment we'd be swallowed up by a giant. It'd be ridiculous to say it wasn't sometimes beautiful. Mostly it was just haunting. Looking out from that little guard building that first night, I felt what deep-sea divers must feel when they drift into a place not meant for humans. I slept like a log from the moment I got home till I was supposed to wake up and get ready for work the next night. Second night went a lot like the first, except one thing. Sometime during twilight, we were walking the perimeter and cracking jokes and forming the first threads of a friendship when I asked what was in the old building we'd been enlisted to watch. Caleb grew quiet at that. I'll tell you about it when we get back around. The rest of the walk carried on in relative silence. We stepped into the booth and sat down, clicking on the heater. Listen, he said. I told you I haven't been on this job that long, but from what I understand, Greg's had someone at this post for at least the past year. I don't know why, and I don't care, but rumors get around, you know. From what I've heard, and don't take this as gospel, is that the town wants to bulldoze this place right over and build something more useful Hell, if I know what's that have to do? He cut me off, holding up his palm. Apparently, the property rights of this place has been tied up in the courts for a while. You could be on watch out here for who knows how long. The property holder won't give the place up without a fight. Whoever they are, they're willing to shell out a lot of cachet to keep people out. All I gotta say, Cody, is that you better never ever go into that place. He pointed at the old building through the window. Just mind your own and call the police if you see anything suspicious. I shifted in my chair, glancing at the large structure and looking back at Caleb. I hadn't known him very long, but something told me this was very out of character for him. He wasn't acting like the goof-off I'd come to know over the past 2 nights. There was something very unsettling about his eyes. They seemed to physically sink back into their respective sockets as he stared me down. "What's in there, Caleb?" I asked softly. "As far as you're concerned." He leaned back in his chair. "Not a goddamn thing." He reached over and picked up the stack of playing cards and slapped them on the desk. "It's your turn to deal." The rest of that second night seemed to go on from there, just as the previous had, and as the dark turned to day. I assumed Caleb was doing nothing more than entertaining a bit. Woohoo, pick on the new guy and all that. Maybe some kind of hazing period. How fun. The third night has been a nightmare. It started out simply enough. I came to the lot in my beat-up Jetta, like the previous 2, except this time Jeremy was there to greet me. He handed off a keyring with very few words. I locked the gate as Jeremy left and settled down into the guard box. This night, at the recommendation of Caleb, I'd brought a few books with me, but after flicking through them absent-mindedly, I set them aside and laid the playing cards out for a game of solitaire. It didn't take more than an hour before I missed not being the only one there. My eyes kept drifting up to the wide window, looking out on the big empty building, so I shifted my chair so as to face away from it. But gazing out into the eternal black trees fared no better. If being in that booth with Caleb was like delving into the deepest depths of the ocean, then this was hell. I took off my hat and ran my hands through my hair, convincing myself that I was just a little spooked. They don't call it the graveyard shift for nothing, right? I'm ashamed to admit that I waited longer than I should have before taking my first patrol around the edges of the property. Once I'd decided I couldn't sit in that godforsaken box all night, I stepped into the night air, placing my cap on my head and flipping the collar of my jacket up. The wool-like cloth was little comfort against the nape of my neck, like that would keep the imaginary spirits or nymphs in the forest at bay. I clicked on my flashlight and followed the edge of the property, never straying too far from the fence. I held the light out in front of me, washing away the filthy darkness ahead, but my eyes drifted to the razor wire lining the top of the fence as I went. For the second time, I thought about how excessive that was. Who was I supposed to be keeping out anyway? Activists? Stoner kids? This place wasn't exactly make-out point. As I was watching the fence on my patrol, I stepped over my own feet and stumbled forward a bit, catching myself before I fell. That startled me. I shot my light around in the darkness, but it landed on the trees, the building, the ground, nothing. I started laughing at myself a little. Stupid. I was being stupid. After my small fit, I continued walking the perimeter, and it started to feel more like it had those first 2 nights. I fell into a rhythm with my walk. Then a thought occurred to me. I'm out here in the middle of the woods. Shouldn't I hear crickets or rustling leaves? The only noise I could hear was the wind beating against me. That couldn't be normal. I shone my light across the trees on the other side of the fence. The branches were moving, but they made no sound. I shook my head. It was just the night. I'm sure they're making noises. I can't hear them, that's all. I ignored this and kept going. Once I'd reached the point furthest from the gate, I watched the big structure out of the corner of my eye and could feel it had an immense physical presence. It was looming, pressing down on me. I felt short of breath. Then it happened. A shriek like something I'd never heard came rattling out of the structure, and I froze. It sounded inhuman. It sounded like murder. I willed my legs to move, but that scream vibrated through my body and kept me still. The sound came to a sudden stop without trailing off. I stayed where I was with the fence to my back. I was facing the structure, full on, watching, waiting. I just knew that something was going to be peering down at me from one of those open windows. But they all stayed absolutely black. I finally understand why people in horror films do what they do. Without realizing it, my feet were carrying me towards the building with Caleb's words echoing in my head. Never, ever go into that place. Even still, I moved forward, crossing the 40 or so feet in a second. I wasn't shaking. I was stone cold, stiff with every single muscle in my body tense. Every sinew, guitar string tight, so that I moved steady and robotic. I came to the nearest black open window on the first floor and peered into the void. I hoisted my flashlight up into the window, and what I saw next might be surprising. Nothing. There was nothing in there. Lots of furniture covered in white sheets and old tables that looked like they were used for woodworking with rusted tools strewn all about them. Sure, but nothing nefarious or sinister. My legs started to shake as the adrenaline unclenched around me, and I sighed. Something ran across my spotlight from the recess. Shadows before I could make out its features, and in exactly 2 milliseconds I yelped. It escaped me like a breath. Before I could turn and run, it stepped back into the light. It was a featureless naked man with rubbery movements. I couldn't tell if it had any eyes, but I'm sure he looked right at me before. It let out that same shrieking sound I'd heard earlier. My stomach argued with itself over whether to void my bowels or leap out of my mouth. I ran. God, I ran. I moved like a block of wood with a cement base. I couldn't run fast enough, but the scenery whipped past me in a blur. I only looked over my shoulder once and saw the thing, or man, or whatever the hell it was, come bounding. Out of the window I'd been looking into only moments. Before, it was chasing me. His body moved like the gel in a lava lamp. It was like jelly, and yet it maintained a physical form, without knowing I was doing it. I ran into the guard booth, slamming the glass door behind me and locking it. I watched the man sprinting like water across the lot. He slammed into the door, and for the first time I realized exactly how large he was. Standing at least 8 feet tall just outside of the door. After his first barrage against the door, he stood there staring at me with milky white eyes. He had no mouth to speak of, at least not conventionally. Instead of lips or teeth, he only had a gaping black hole. He lifted his arm, and it moved wobbly like sheet metal, and slammed his fist against the door. This made me jump and take a step back. Fuck off. I screamed. He craned his head back and once again let out that shriek. I moved to the side of the room, completely opposite the glass door. His screams stopped, and he looked back at me with those dead eyes. Fuck off, he screamed, mimicking me in a harsh and hissing voice. The hole where his mouth should have been didn't move to produce the syllables. Go, please, go away. Please God, please, I pleaded, realizing for the first time that warm tears were running down my face. His fist landed against the door again, harder, sending webs down the glass. Go, please. Go away. Please, God, please. I reached for my mace instinctively, not knowing if it would help me if push came to shove. Listen, fucker. I don't want to use this, but I will. I held the canister out in front of me, pointing the opening towards him. Listen, fucker. He screamed, striking the door again while bits of glass fell from the frame of the door onto the inside of the booth. I don't want to use this, but I will. He reached through the hole in the door, slicing himself on the glass. His oozing, thick red blood dripped onto the floor. I sprayed the mace at his protruding arm, but it did nothing. After emptying it, I threw the canister at him, and it fell to the floor with a clatter. I pressed myself against the opposite wall window and wept. I wept heavier than I ever did when I was a child. He mimicked that too. I closed my eyes, and I let out a scream that I didn't know I could. I'm sure it was my death rattle, and it seemed to last forever. But as my scream trailed off into a hoarse whisper, something else was screaming too. At first I thought it was him. It wasn't. In fact, it wasn't a scream at all. It was a siren wailing off from somewhere in the direction of the factory. I opened my eyes and he was gone. I caught a glimpse of him in the distance, moving around the corner of the structure and disappearing. The siren lasted for 5 minutes maybe. I don't know. I've since moved the desk across the room, in front of the door. Every nothing in the darkness out there makes me jump as I write this. I think I'm going to quit. I'll try to keep you guys up to date if anything new happens. I work in the South Pole. I'm aware that sounds exciting, and it truly is, but it's a difficult job with taxing hours. We were sent to the middle of Antarctica with 1,000 miles of snow and ice on all sides. We worked a solid 7 to 5, and with the lack of recreation, we typically do 18-hour days. However, we do have slow satellite Wi-Fi, which is what keeps me sane during the long days. Regardless, all this wasn't the problem. The problem was the sheer atmosphere of oppression. The whole place didn't feel right. Most of the facility is subterranean with covered heaters atop the roof and an entrance into a cement stairwell. The bunker is what you'd expect. Grey, concrete square with men and women's bunking areas and a few couples' rooms. A large bathroom facility with shower and toilet stalls, plus 3 labs and a fully stocked cafeteria, all with no windows. There was also a medical bay and 2 rooms with couches for therapy. After the double-section entrance was the rec room. It had a pool table and bar. The wall was knotty pine wood paneling like from the 1970s. The rooms were all attached by a long, dingy hallway, including 2 offices with desks and chairs. Spent most of my time there. Atop the station was an observation deck, reachable with a ladder, with windows where we could see and hear the outdoors. But we usually only went up to smoke, since it was nearly as cold as the outside. The whole place was poorly lit, fluorescent lights and a few lamps in corners. But overall, it looked like a dingy green, underground. Cement held outside is exactly what you would expect from Antarctica. Snow for hundreds of miles in all directions. If you have a fear of open water, it feels like that, except you have to walk in it. I was a little surprised as to why they invited so many on this particular expedition. There were 12 of us total. Usually 6 would suffice, all professionals in our fields. However, The range of work each of us did was surprising. Typically, it would be a singular field of study to accomplish a common goal. But on this expedition there were several different professions. The first was an older Finnish gentleman, a medical doctor, who was skilled in healing injuries in frozen climates. The next was a physicist who really was as surprised as us to be in the South Pole, for their work is often theoretical and when in practice requires a team in and of itself. The next two were a British husband and wife team, both geologists. There were 3 men in their 30s for maintenance and driving, specialized in sub-zero conditions and masters in any repair field. Also, there was biologist, a young black lady who wore her hair in a bun and kept her lab coat on at all times inside. She was all work and no fun. Then there were even 2 therapists. Yes, 2 therapists. The first is what you'd expect. A middle-aged lady with blonde bangs and a clipboard, always wearing a warm smile. The other, well, he was a tall, lanky fellow. He was gaunt and his hair was jet black. Honestly, I had no idea why he would be a therapist. I myself was intimidated to even say hi to him. I never saw anyone join him in therapy unless he specifically asked them. I usually tried to avoid him. There was another man who I assumed was a cook, until I saw we had to make our own meals. He was an odd, mousy-looking fellow. He didn't speak to anyone, and when I tried he would simply ignore me. I maintained that he would be my favorite person on this expedition, since he kept 100% to himself. Me. I was the chaplain. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. There are half a dozen professionals here, and they need a chaplain. Well, I didn't think it made sense, but when I was contacted by the organization funding the trip, I didn't argue. They were offering a lot of money, and in my line of work, that is a rarity. The expedition was to be 6 months, and we were to each conduct specific experiments. I don't know what the others were assigned, but I was to journal on the religious implications of the expedition and provide any counsel for all the other participants on the trip of any sect or faith. The counsel assignment I didn't have a problem with, but the journaling, that's the kind of thing college freshmen journal on in Theology 101. Either way, I was getting paid. So I sucked it up and spent the rest of my free time downloading movies and games to pass the long hours in between counseling. Surprisingly, a lot of people came to me for religious discussion. I won over the maintenance guy's approval when I cracked open a beer with them and talked Catholicism on the old Red Rec Room couch. I'm a Protestant minister, so they were a little standoffish at first. We became fast friends, and even though I couldn't bless them or give confession, I think it helped ease stress to feel like they could disclose matters of faith, as well as just have fun conversation, either way. I got along well with everyone after enough time. The physicist was a staunch atheist, so we played pranks on each other frequently. I would hide his laptop out of easy reach, blaring, "Jesus take the wheel," and he would wake me up half the days with no church in the wild. Considered him my second best friend in the compound, even though that song did give me chills when I thought about how far away we were from civilization. My best friend was the odd man. He was always around the rec room when I was, and he never spoke. He wore an orange hoodie and jeans indoors, and always seemed like he was drinking alone at the dimly lit makeshift bar. I thought nothing of it, since our schedules were all different, and I could absolutely condone drinking yourself senseless in a place like this. It was lonely most days. We did our own thing at our own stations, often eating lunch their frozen meals or MREs usually. I did spend quite some time talking with the doctor. He was a Buddhist, So we spent many mornings meditating in his medical station under the buzzing fluorescent lights. He said that the place gave him an odd feeling. It was hard to be centered here in this cement brick, buried in the snow. It did get to me after a while. When I was alone and the lights were quiet, I swear I could hear ... whispering after one particular incident, where I swore I heard clear words. I started wearing headphones. They helped quite a bit with filling my ears with noise and blocking out the outside world. Once a week supplies were dropped in. From the coastal base hundreds of miles away, we restart the cigarettes, whiskey and other non-essentials like food and water. I say that to point out whoever was paying for this was dropping serious money. I never met the main client. Rather, I was contacted through their representatives. Apparently, the man funding it was very wealthy, very driven and very religious, and he was highly invested in this expedition. He wanted a success, but no one knew his goal with this ordeal he was funding. Also, once a week we would go out in the Snow Rover, a giant SUV that could ride over the snow and ice. We would take samples of the ice and examine a previous dig site from the last crew. I could not imagine the crew that had to come all the way out here to build the facility, but I bet they got paid crazy money. Some days we would all go just to get out and see the sun we couldn't leave during a blizzard. But most days only the necessary crew for the excavation would go. Whenever we went, we had to wear a harness attached by rope to the SUV to avoid slipping down the ice and being injured. We can only go once a week due to the outside conditions and distance to the dig site. I mentioned both of these to say that we were alone out here, and if a plane came Monday, then we had 7 days until it returned. Then was the first big shift. It was exactly 2 months in the base. The team who left that day were the geologists, the biologist with one maintenance man to drive and man the harnesses. They left in good spirits and remained at the site for hours. However, they returned ... shaken. They burst in the door while I was in the rec room with the therapist, and we immediately noticed the fear in their eyes. The lady geologist ran to the couple's room without saying a word. Her husband chased after, calling her name. We asked what happened and noticed the biologist was crying. The other therapist entered the room like a ghost, and without a word he ushered her into his office and closed the door. The doctor burst in and boomed, "What on earth is going on?" "I don't know," said the first therapist. She was anxious, as was I. "Where's Jack?" "The maintenance worker who drove the SUV, wait, where's the car?" I inquired, opening the door to the outside. I saw nothing but our flag, a long set of footprints, and miles of ice gleaming in the sunlight. We sat for what felt like hours in the rec room. All of us who didn't go on the field expedition, that is. The others were in the tall therapist's office. Panicked voices could be heard behind the door. Finally, they all exited. The geologists went to their room without saying a word. The biologist sat in one of the empty folding chairs. The therapist stood behind her, hands on the back of her seat. She had clearly been crying since she returned. We got there ahead of schedule, she started. Gathering her composure, the dig site. We arrived at 0700 instead of 8, so we got to work early. At first all was fine. Jack was in the SUV minding the harnesses. I was chiseling away at a small patch of ice when I heard the others call from below. We looked at her, hanging on her every shaking word. She continued, "I slid down to the base of the hole. About 30 meters down, I think. They had struck a hard surface. We all dug together and pulled out a massive lockbox. Immediately, we assumed it was left from the last dig. But the design was old. It looked like something from World War II. It was heavy and sealed shut. We tugged the rope to signal Jack, but there was no response. We started calling out for him, but he never called back. We couldn't see him from our vantage point. After a solid 10 minutes of screaming, we made our way up the hill using our tools. We used an extra length of cord to pull the box up. It took all three of us, but we got it up. When we reached the top, Jack was nowhere to be found. We searched the perimeter for well over an hour, but with maximum visibility we would have seen him. We checked for holes in the ice and signs of footprints, but his earlier tracks never left the side of the SUV. We loaded the box in the back and kept searching. We noticed something then, something we absolutely should have seen already. When we climbed atop the vehicle for a better vantage point, we saw a massive, single message in the snow. Run. We looked at her in disbelief. The mutual feeling of sympathy and that I could have searched better people tend to have. She started tearing up again. We panicked. WE drove away, but none of us can operate a vehicle designed for snow and ice. We crashed into a massive pothole about a mile south of here. We left the car and walked back. The find is still there, and Jack is somewhere in that deserted wasteland. After this, she broke down in sobs and left the dorm. Jack hadn't answered a single radio call or even made an attempt at reaching us. The dig site was an hour's drive from our base, and we were thousands of miles from any other researchers. We were essentially powerless to do anything. First things first, said the one of the other repairman. We need to get our ride back. He suited up, and the other maintenance worker left on a snowmobile designed for short distance. Now, I don't know how they did it, but they managed to bring the SUV back safely in less than an hour. By now it was getting dark, and the search for Jack would be too dangerous to continue tonight. We didn't sleep that night. The odd man didn't even come to bed. He just wandered the halls, drinking. I lay there, listening to music to drown out the sounds of silent sobs coming from down the hall. This concrete slab, this tomb in the middle of a frozen dead zone. We were completely and utterly alone. The doctor remarked before bed, if Jack is still alive, he may be better off out there. The next morning we set out. All of us, except the two therapists and the odd man, who I assumed was sleeping off a hangover. We dragged the locked box out of the vehicle and laid it in the rec room. We loaded up and decided to deal with opening it later. We searched the dig site and surrounding area until evening and turned up nothing. The message in the snow was nowhere to be found, and there had been no snowfall that night. We found no tracks, no signs, no body, no anything. We returned depressed and feeling responsible for our missing companion. When we returned, however, we were greeted by an odd sight, a jet. On the snow was a ski-fitted jet, and not like the crappy junk plane that dropped us off. This was an expensive private jet. We entered the facility to the sounds of loud, booming laughter. A short, bald man with a white goatee sat in the rec room with the shrinks. He was smoking a cigar and wore a very nice suit. Two very large men in sunglasses stood on either side of the door. We were slightly stunned. The man said in a hard southern drawl, turning to us, "If it ain't the rest of the party," who I was cut short. "Allow me to introduce myself." He stood, extending his ringed hand, Earl redacted. "Pleased to meet you all, finally." We took turns, awkwardly introducing ourselves, realizing this must be the guy in charge. He invited us into the cafeteria to have an official meeting. This was the second weird shift in the trip. He offered condolences in regards to Jack and expressed that it was no one's fault he went missing. As for that message in the snow, he said, lowering his voice, I would say this whole place tells you to run at some point. Don't let it get to you. He finally revealed his focus of the expedition, that we were to discover any signs of past visits man had ventured. He also expressed that he wanted to colonize the South Pole, but needed to know the psychological effects of people living here. That's why he sent 2 mental health associates and a minister. He pointed at me, saying this, making me feel exposed and awkward. He again thanked us and sent us to bed after the best steak dinner I've ever had prepared. This guy was serious. He flew in his personal chef to thank us for our work. The next morning, after a bacon and eggs breakfast, he took us into the tall therapist's office, one at a time to shoot the shit, as he so delicately put it. When it was my turn, he was very respectful. A gesture I appreciate when no one knows I'm a minister, but it feels forced at times when there is pretense. How are you, Reverend? He asked softly. Well, I replied, not sure how to answer that question in light of the past few days. Glad to hear it. He smiled at the ground. Son, I'm going to level with you. You are the most important person here. How's that? I inquire, wondering if he's flattering me or not. Well, he started, looking for the right words. This trip is more for psychological research than anything. Wah, he cut me off. We wanted a religious figure and at least 2 therapists to log the mental strain on living out here. We want to build a new civilization, but we have been testing different groups in small segments of time. Why me? It was the foremost of many pressing questions. Well, he said, smiling, I'm a Methodist boy myself, but I picked you because of an article you wrote a while back. You said in the final line that you have the same philosophy as me. What's that? I inquired, as I had written a few articles in my time and wasn't sure which one he meant. To truly understand God, we must also understand his counterpart. I immediately knew the article to which he referred. It was an article I wrote after seminary on demonology in modern society. I shuddered, as this was an unpleasant field of research. Either way, the man had done his work on me, but I still wasn't sure what a short article on demons qualified me for a mission in the Antarctic. I left the room with Earl and we proceeded to rejoin the others. We predominantly listened to him rant on, rather than talk amongst ourselves. We just didn't feel right. We were here, in the warmth, while this man was bellowing on, and our friend was out there, cold and alone. I overheard many times the biologist and geologists ask to leave. At first their requests were simply brushed off, but by the last requests he sternly reminded them that they were under contract. They resolved themselves to their rooms after that Earl left that night, with the instruction to report our findings, if there were any. He then boarded his plane with his bodyguards and left promptly. Before bed, I swear I heard whispering from the observation deck. But when I went to see, there was nothing. The next day, a massive blizzard rolled in. We resolved that Jack had died in the snow outside. No person could survive a sub-zero blizzard after 3 days. This is officially where things went bad. We decided to open the lockbox. It was sealed by metal welding all the way around. It took a little while, but the other 2 maintenance men used blowtorches on the chest until it finally came free. They strained to pull the lid off its container. We gathered around close. I found myself the closest to the box. They flipped the heavy lid over, which shook black soot loose from the chest. We coughed, and when it cleared we saw the contents. There was nothing. or at least nothing important. We found a piece of string, a thimble, and salt scattered about. We sat there, rubbing our heads and looking at each other. We discussed why this would be out there in the ice, so many layers deep. We talked a little while, until I noticed the physicist leaving. He was pale as a ghost, so I chased him to ask what was the matter. "Hey," I shouted as I caught up to him in the dorm. "You good?" He stood there, shaking his head. After a long pause, he responded, "No." "What is it?" I was curious as to why he was acting so strange out of nowhere. Meanwhile, I saw the other participants walk down the hall to the cafeteria. Only I noticed that the man in the orange hoodie was nowhere to be seen. My thoughts were shaken when the physicist spoke up. "Did you see the word on the lid?" he asked quietly. "No, I was confused. I must have missed it." "Can you read Hebrew?" he asked, choking back tears it sounded. "No," I replied. "I studied Greek." "Wait, can you?" "Yeah, I'm Jewish, or was. I can read well enough Hebrew at least." His voice shook. "I wish I couldn't. What did it say?" "Dibuk," he said as a tear rolled down his face. I had never seen him like this before, and frankly, I was a little scared. "You can't buy into Thar, no," he shouted, cutting me off. "You know as well I as do that this place is wrong. It does things to you." God, the first week I chased footsteps around the shower every morning, only to realize I was alone every single time. "Listen." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "We're going to be okay." I wish I could say I was telling the truth, but that box did have some sort of weird feeling around it. That night, around 2 a.m., I awoke to the sound of footsteps. They were so loud, I heard them over my headphones. I went to check around, and no one was awake besides me. I heard soft sobbing from the couple's room, but knew better than to disturb them. They had it pretty rough right now. As I returned to my bunk, I walked by the cafeteria and caught something ... awful. I turned to see the most horrendous sight I have ever seen. All the chairs and tables were scattered and flipped. Food was smeared all along the walls and ceilings, and utensils and appliances were scattered about. In the center of the floor was a massive, rusted steel cross, and nailed to it was ... Jack. He was soaked from head to toe in blood, and his eyes looked as if every vein had burst. Barbed wire covered his arms and legs, and nails were driven through his wrists and ankles. He was bald and thin, and when we made eye contact, he shook violently. Then he shrieked through spattering blood. Belphegor, now was my turn to lose control. I fell backward and slid on the tile. I must have been screaming my lungs out, for everyone poured into the hallway, asking in confusion what was happening. I had urinated. I pointed to the cafeteria through tears and panicked breaths. The inside was totally normal. Nothing was out of place. No cross, no Jack, no destruction. The last thing I remember was showering and opening a bottle of Jack. It was only 3 hours later. I awoke in the rec room, covered by a blanket. Jane, the therapist, was asleep on the opposite couch. She was sweet through all of this, and I'm sure she was disappointed in my lack of professionalism. I was still drunk when I stood. Everyone was still asleep, and the blizzard still blasted our compound. I wandered the hall and heard the sobbing from the couple's room again. I realized in my stupor that they may need help. I knocked softly on the door, but the crying continued uninterrupted. Before I could knock again, I had to resolve myself to the toilet. I ran and vomited into the bowl, now feeling slightly more alert. As I stood wiping my mouth, I caught the brief glimpse of a figure leaving the bathroom. It was dark and tall, but I couldn't catch any more details. I finally had enough and returned to my bunk. I fell into a restless sleep that night, but I slept nonetheless. I awoke the next day to someone shaking my arm. Wake up. My vision focused to see one of the maintenance men. Power's out and people are missing. I stood groggily. He turned to the hallway, where I could hear voices in the cafeteria. I saw the only other person in the room was the physicist. He was facing the away towards the wall. "Come on," I slurred. He didn't stir. He just laid there. I only left because I saw him breathing. I walked into the cafeteria. It was lit by emergency candles on the tables, where I saw the biologist, Jane, the doctor, and the 2 maintenance men. Counting me, this was less than half our original group. They turned, and the other maintenance man said, "Well, look who it is. You're gonna scare the hell out of us again." I didn't smile or disagree. I just sat beside the doctor and asked where the geologists were. "They won't answer their door," Jane said, her age truly beginning to show in her tired, drawn eyes. "The other therapist as well is missing." "We're going to leave," chimed the biologist, "as soon as the blizzard dies down." "Fuck their contracts." "How?" "We're 1,000 miles from the nearest base." I felt negative for saying, but I didn't want to risk certain death for a little cabin fever. "Well," chimed the man who woke me, "we have a massive sled we'll load with every tank of gas. Then we just have to get within 50 miles to the nearest base to be within radio contact. We have GPS, we'll drive in shifts, and we'll take our time as to avoid pitfalls. Is this agreeable?" asked the doctor. Everyone nodded in agreement. "In that case," he continued, "I suggest we spend the next few days together, hoping the missing members return, and if not, then we will beg their forgiveness in hell." I spent the day sitting in a daze. I just had no clue why we were all so distraught. We all layered up in the dark and hunkered down. We made small talk in an attempt to fill the void. The dancing candlelight played tricks on our eyes, and the dark was oppressive. The 6 of us sat there, just sitting, just waiting. Finally, around 1806 p.m., Jane suggested we check on the geologists. We stayed close down the hallway and heard the sobbing. It was softer, but still present. Jane knocked, waited, knocked again. Then she shouted she was coming in, but the door was locked. The maintenance man began pounding his fist and threatened to break in. He took out a kerning and picked out a key. It fit the door, and he slowly opened it to the bedroom. Inside was a nightmare. The first thing I noticed was the blood. It was everywhere. The walls, the bed, the ceiling, the floors. It covered the lamp and bathed the room in a deep red. On the bed was the male geologist. His eyes were wide open in shock and his mouth hung agape. His throat was torn out and his leg was chewed to the bone. His wife sat beside him with her BCD to us. She turned, covered in blood herself. She was crying and chewing. She sputtered the bloody meat while sobbing. Her expression turned from sorrow to one of pure, unadulterated rage. She contorted her mouth to scream, but only a hoarse gargle and bits of flesh came out. The maintenance worker closed the door, and we all panicked in unison. "Get the door," the doctor shouted. We followed him to the kitchen and pulled tables in front of the door. We piled enough furniture to board that animal in her cage. We returned to the rec room. Everyone was crying, and Jane was in the fetal position, shaking uncontrollably. "We leave tomorrow," huffed the doctor in between shudders. The blizzard still raged outside. I swear, at times the wind was so loud I felt like it mocked me. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because a massive blast woke me. I looked up to see others jumping to their feet. We got ourselves to the ladder and climbed to the observation deck. Outside, we saw blackness expanding, all except for a large patch of light a few meters away. Through the whiteout conditions we could make out fire. The SUV was in flames, gas tanks stacked around it. Atop the flames was a person. Upon closer inspection, I could see it was naked and dancing. Oh God. The biologist lifted her hand to her mouth. Jane. It was Jane. She was naked and being burned by the flames. Her howls echoed through the dark storm. We watched as the fire consumed her body. She shrieked and screeched until she finally fell, remaining silent forever. We walked downstairs, feeling hopeless. We sat in the dark of the rec room, and no one spoke until morning. The physicist was still in bed. He was trying to ignore everything, but at this point I knew he was too far gone. The footsteps were loud in the unoccupied rooms, but at this point I had given up. If I was to die here, then so be it. We huddled in blankets and coats against the wall. We sat and we cried. A candle in front of our feet was the only light source. I closed my eyes tight so not to see dark shadow pacing the room in front of us. The next morning the power returned. The lights were flickering and we stood slowly in the dim, intermittent glow. I heard music playing in the showers. We all walked together and looked inside. Within was the song Jesus Take the Wheel being played on loop from an MP3 player. We walked into the dull grey room and saw the physicist naked, sitting on the floor in front of the iPod player. Blood appeared to be running into the drain beneath him. He slowly turned his head to me. He held up his left hand to his lips and hissed a long she. With the other hand he lifted his bloodied, mutilated genitals. He closed his eyes and smiled a large, toothy smile. He whispered behind closed teeth, "I like this song now." "God," said the doctor. He slowly approached the bloodied man, attempting to keep him calm. He continued, "It's okay, boy. I'm here to help." The physicist snickered again, eyes still closed and teeth still bared in a snarling grin. As the doctor got close, the man shrieked with inhuman volume and sprang forward. He tackled the doctor to the ground and sunk teeth deep into the old man's jugular. Blood ran down both the doctor's neck and the physicist's teeth. He stood, turning his violent intent at us. The doctor sputtered blood and choked for air. As the brooding man crouched to leap, a loud bang filled our ears. I fell to the ground in agony. The screeching in my eardrums was unbearable. Finally, it cleared and I saw the physicist now laying dead in a pool of his own blood. In his head was a circular wound that bore all the way through his skull. One of the maintenance workers was holding a smoking pistol. We were now 4. Me, the biologist, and the other 2 maintenance workers. The rest were now all missing or dead. Although the power was on, the satellite was down, thus ruining our chances for radio and Wi-Fi. We all paced and cried and panicked for hours, until finally one of the maintenance men spoke up. "Our only chance at survival is to fix that dish." We looked at him and silently knew he spoke the truth. The outside was still completely whited out from the amount of snow and wind. "I'll go," spoke up the other man. "We'll go together," said the first. The biologist and I knew we could not argue. We watched them in their coats leave into the unforgiving blizzard. We waited for what seemed like hours, searching for radio signals and Wi-Fi. Finally, it came back. We smiled for the first time in a while and prepared for the men's return. We sat and waited, and waited, and waited. We didn't say anything, but we knew. We knew we were the last. She fell asleep in my lap after we cried ourselves tired. Before I closed my eyes, I swear I heard the giggles of a child. I awoke sometime. Later, I was utterly alone. I yelled for the biologist. I searched each and every room until I found the last thing I wanted to find. I found her in the observatory. She wrote a lovely note about wanting to see the outside world before she died. In her arm was an empty syringe that I guess is what she used to end her life. Her eyes were blank, staring into oblivion. I left her to her peace. Now, the reason I write this in my probable last moments of clarity, the reason we were brought to this frozen hell only to die, the reason I'm sending out this story before I put an emergency flare gun down my mouth. I returned to the office I had been using. I was hysterical. I saw my reflection in the display mirror and noticed my eyes were totally black. This sight brought me to smash the mirror. I sliced my knuckles, which rocked me back to reality, and in my second of clarity, I noticed the slip of paper that fell from the shattered pieces. It was a note with a picture attached. The note read, "If you're reading this, then I hope it isn't too late. This place is not what you think. The man in charge is not a religious cook. He is much more dangerous. By now, you may have found that undiscovered lockbox. In it, you found some trinkets to spook you. There is probably a minister with you to comment on the materials as evil. This is their set and setting. That black dust that flew out. It wasn't dust and it wasn't evil. God, these people don't want to colonize. Ever wonder why you're so far away from any other bases? This is weapons testing facility. You have unknowingly been testing compounds for a private company. This particular compound is an untraceable, psychosis-inducing strain of pathogen that is meant for world leaders. The concept is to have the enemy kill itself. If you've breathed the black dust, then it is too late. All you can do is attempt to get this message out, but do not trust the maintenance men and do not trust the tall therapist. They are working for Earl. They will disappear without a trace shortly after his visit. They've logged your behaviors, so even if the blizzard, which is what I assume you're already in, subsides, you'll be found and killed if you escape. I'm so sorry. I lost my entire team. I wish you never would have come. I'm sorry, Dave. The picture attached was what I assume was the previous team. In red ink, a man was circled and labeled me. In the picture was a mousy man in an orange hoodie and jeans.